Okay, I'm taking over for Grandpa now. So after the victory of the Bat Mat Caro, the army or library of Gup entered Chup City in triumph. At the height of Mudra, many Chupwallas threw in their lot with the Guppies. Chupwalla maidens rushed black-nosed into the icy streets and garlanded the red-nosed and halo-headed Guppies with black snowdrops, and kissed them too, and called them liberators of Chup. Blabbermouth, her loose flowing hair no longer concealed beneath velvet cap or halo helmet, attracted the attention of several of the young lads of Chup City, but she stayed as close as she could to Mudra, as did Rashid Khalifa, and both Rashid and Blabbermouth found their thoughts turning constantly to Haroun. Where was he? Was he safe? When would he return? Prince Bolo, who was out in front on his prancing mechanical horse, began to shout out in his habitual dashing but rather foolish way. "Where are you, Katam Shud? Come out, you! Minions are defeated, and now it's your turn. Batshiet, never fear, Bolo is here. Where are you, Batshiet, my golden girl, my love, Batshiet, oh, Batshiet mine!" "If you'd be quiet for a moment, you'd know soon enough where your Batshiet waits," a Chupwalla voice called out from the crowd that had gathered to greet the Guppies. Many Chupwallas had started breaking the laws of silence now, cheering, shouting, and so on. "Yes, use your ears," a woman's voice agreed. "Can't you hear that racket that's been driving us all to drink?" "She sings?" Prince Bolo exclaimed, cupping a hand around an ear. "My, Batshiet sings? Then hush, friends, and hearken to her song." He raised an arm. The Guppy parade came to a halt, and now, wafting down to them from the citadel of Chup, came a woman's voice singing songs of love. It was the most horrible voice Rashid Khalifa, the Shah of Blah, had heard in all his life. "If that's Batshiet," he thought, but he did not dare to say, "then you can almost understand why the cult master wants to shut her up for good." "Oh, I'm talking about my Bolo, and I ain't got no name. Time for nothing else," sang Batshiet, and glass shattered in shop windows. "I'm sure I know that song, but the words seem different," puzzled Rashid. "Let me tell you about a boy I know. He's my Bolo, and I love him so," sang Batshiet, and men and women in the crowd begged, "No more, no more." Rashid frowned and shook his head. "Yes, yes, it's very familiar too, but not exactly right. He won't play polo, he can't fly solo. Ooh-ee, but I love him true. Our love will grow low. I will never let him go low. Guppy's waiting for my Bolo blues," sang Batshiet, and Prince Bolo shouted, "Beautiful! That's so beautiful!" To which the crowd of Chupwallas rejoined, "Somebody stop her, please." "His name ain't Rollo, his voice ain't Lolo. But I love him fine. To stop the show, low, pay me what you owe, low. I'm gonna make that Bolo mine," sang Batshiet, and Prince Bolo, cavorting on his horse, almost swooned with delight. "Just listen to that," he rhapsodized. "Is that a voice, or what is it?" "It must be a what is it?" the crowd shouted back, "because a voice it is certainly not." Prince Bolo was deeply miffed. "These persons obviously cannot appreciate fine contemporary singing," he said aloud to General Kitab and Mudra. "So I think we should attack the citadel now, if you don't mind." At that moment, a miracle happened. The ground shook beneath their feet once, twice, thrice. The houses of Chup City trembled. Many Chupwallas, and Guppies too, cried out in terror. Prince Bolo fell off his horse. "An earthquake, an earthquake," the people shouted. But it was no ordinary earthquake. It was the entire moon Cathari, with a mighty shuddering and a mighty juddering, spinning on its axis towards the... "Look at the sky!" voices were shouting. "Look what's happening over the horizon!" Towards the sun. The sun was rising over Chup City, near the citadel of Chup. It was rising rapidly and went on rising until it was directly overhead, blazing down in the full fury of its noonday heat. And there it stayed. Many Chapwalas, including Mudra, the shadow warrior, took really rather fashionable wraparound dark glasses out of their pockets and put them on. Surprise! It tore away the shrouds of silence and the shadow which the sorcery of Katam Shud had hung around the citadel. The black ice of that fortress received the sunlight like a mortal wound. The locks on the citadel gates melted away. Prince Bolo, with drawn sword, galloped through the open gates, followed by Mudra and several chapters of pages. "But Shia!" Bolo shouted as he charged. His horse whinnied at the name. "Bolo!" came the faraway reply. Bolo dismounted and, with Mudra, ran up flights of stairs and through courtyards and up yet more staircases, while all around them the pillars of Khatum Shud's citadel, softened by the sun's heat, began to buckle and bend. Arches were drooping, cupolas melting. The shadowless servants of the cultmaster, the members of the unicorn, of the union of the zipped lips, were running blindly hither and yon, smashing into walls, knocking one another out as they collided, and shrieking dreadfully, all laws of silence forgotten in their fear. It was the moment of Khatum Shud's final destruction. As Bolo and the shadow warrior leaped upward into the melting heart of the citadel, the prince's cries of "Batshia" brought walls and towers tumbling down, and at last, just as they were despairing about her safety, the Princess Batshia came into sight with that nose in a black chapwala nose warmer, those teeth, but there's no need to go into that. Let's just say there was no question but that it was indeed Batshia, followed by her handmaidens, sliding down towards them along the banister of a grand staircase whose steps had melted away. Bolo waited. Batshia flew off the banister into his arms. He staggered backwards, but did not fall. Now the air was full of a great groaning noise. As Bolo, Batshia, Mudra, and the handmaidens fled down through soggy courtyards and down squashy staircases, they looked back and saw, high above them at the very apex, that's the top, of the citadel, the gigantic ice statue, the colossal ice idol of tongueless, grinning, many-toothed Bezaban began to totter and shake, and then drunkenly it fell. It was like the fall of a mountain. What remained of the halls and courtyards of the citadel of Chup was utterly smashed as Bezaban crashed down. The statue's huge head snapped off at the neck and came rolling and bouncing down the terraces of the citadel towards the lowest courtyard, where Bolo, Mudra, and the ladies now stood at the citadel's gates, watching these events with fascinated horror, with Rashid Khalifa, General Kitab, and a great host of guppies and chapwalas gathered at their backs. Down and down the great head bounced. Its ears, its nose broke off as it hit the ground. The teeth fell from its mouth. Down and down it came. Then, "Look!" shouted Rashid Khalifa, pointing, and a moment later, "Look out!" He had seen an unimpressive little figure in a hooded cloak come scurrying out into the lowest courtyard of the citadel, a skinny, scrawny, sniveling, driveling, mingy, stingy, measly, weaselly, clerkish sort of fellow who had no shadow, but seemed almost as much a shadow as a man himself. It was the cultmaster Khatum Shud, running for his life. He heard Rashid's cry, too late, whirled around with a fiendish yell, and saw the huge head of the colossus of Bezaban as it arrived, hitting him squarely on the nose. It crushed him to bits. Not a shred of him was ever seen again. The head, grinning toothlessly, sat in that courtyard and continued slowly to melt. Peace broke out. The new government of the land of Chup, headed by Mudra, announced its desire for a long and lasting peace with Gup, a peace in which night and day, speech and silence would no longer be separated into zones by twilight strips and walls of force. Mudra invited Miss Blabbermouth to stay with him, to learn the gesture language of Hinaya, so that she might act as go-between for the Guppy authorities and those of Chup, and Blabbermouth accepted gladly. In the meanwhile, Guppy water genies on flying mechanical birds were sent to search the ocean, and after a short time they located the incapacitated Hoopoe being drawn north by Guppy and Baga, with 3 exhausted but happy spies on its back. Haroun was reunited with his father and with Blabbermouth, who seemed oddly awkward and shy in his presence, which was more or less how he felt in hers. They met on the shores of Chup in what had been the twilight strip, and everyone set off contentedly for Gup City because there was a marriage to arrange. Back in Gup City, the speaker of the chatterbox announced certain promotions. If was named Chief Water Genie, Malia was named Head Floating Gardener, and Goopy and Baga were appointed leaders of all the plentimore fishes in the sea. These 4 were given the joint responsibility for the very large cleaning up operation, which was to begin at once across the length and breadth of the ocean of the stream of stories. They announced that they were especially anxious to restore the old zone as soon as possible, so that these ancient tales could be fresh and new once more. Rashid Khalifa was given back his story water facilities and awarded the land of Gup's highest decoration, the Order of the Open Mouth, in recognition of his exceptional services during the war. The newly appointed chief of water genies agreed to reconnect Rashid's water supply personally. But the Hoopoe was quickly restored to its normal shelf as soon as the Gup surface station had fitted it up with its spare brain. And Princess Batshia, she had survived her imprisonment unharmed, although her fear of having her mouth sewn up had left her with a hatred of needles that would last her whole life. And on the day of her wedding to Prince Bolo, the 2 of them looked so happy and so much in love, as they stood on the palace balcony waving to the crowd of guppies and visiting chupwallas gathered below, that everyone decided to forget how incredibly idiotic Batshia had been to get herself captured in the first place, and about Bolo's many pieces of foolish behavior during the war that followed. After all, if the chief water genie whispered to Haroun as they stood together on the balcony, a little way from the happy couple, it's not as if we really let our crowned heads do anything very important around here anyway. A great victory has been won, old King Chattergee was saying to the crowd, a victory for our ocean over its enemy, but also a victory for the new friendship and openness between Chup and Gup over our old hostility and suspicion. A dialogue has been opened, and to celebrate that, as well as this wedding, let all the people sing. Even better, suggested Bolo, let Batshia serenade us. Let her golden voice be heard. There was a brief silence. Then, with one voice, the crowd roared, no, not that! Spare us that, if you please! Batshia and Bolo both looked so hurt that it was necessary for old King Chattergee to save the day by saying soothingly, what the people mean is that on your wedding day, they wish to show their love by singing to you. which was not precisely true, but it cheered the couple up, and then the square was full of song that she had kept her mouth shut, and everyone was happy as could be. As he left the balcony behind the royal party, Haroun was approached by an egghead. "You're to present yourself at once at P2C2E house," the egghead said coldly. "The walrus wants to talk to the person who destroyed so much irreplaceable machinery so willfully." "But it was in a good cause," Haroun protested. The egghead shrugged. "I don't know about that," he said as he walked off. "That's for you to argue and the walrus to decide." Chapter 12. Was it the walrus? "What I need is witnesses," Haroun decided. "Once If and Mally tell the walrus why I had to make my wish, he'll understand about his broken machinery." A wild party was getting underway in the royal palace, and it took Haroun a few minutes to find the chief water genie in the balloon-popping, rice-throwing, streamer-waving throng. He finally located If, whose turban was a little askew, dancing frantically with a young woman genie. Haroun had to shout to make himself heard over the music and general hubbub, and then, to his horror, he saw If purse his lips and shake his head. "Sorry," said the chief water genie. "Argue with the walrus? Not worth the candle, including me out. No can do." "But if you've got to," Haroun pleaded, "somebody has to explain." "Explanations not my forte," If yelled back. "Not my long suit. I'm no good at them. Not my thing at all." Haroun rolled his eyes in frustration and went in search of Molly. He found the head floating gardener at the second wedding party, which was being held on and under the lagoon, for the benefit of those guppies, the plentiful fishes, and the floating gardeners who preferred a watery setting. Molly was easy to spot. He was standing on the back of Butt the Hoopoe with his hat of weeds tilted at a jaunty angle, and he was singing lustily unto an enthusiastic audience of fishes and gardeners. "You can melt dark ships, you can melt what shadow we... You can melt ice castles, but you can't melt me." "Molly," called Haroun, "help!" The head floating gardener broke off his song, took off his hat of weeds, scratched his head, and said through his floral lips, "Walrus? You're on the carpet, heard all about it. Big problem. Sorry, can't assist." "What's the matter with everybody?" cried Haroun. "What's so scary about this walrus anyway? He seemed okay when I met him before, even if his mustache wasn't really very like a walrus mustache." Molly shook his head sadly. "Walrus. Important fellow. Wouldn't like to get on the wrong side of him. You take my meaning?" "Oh, honestly," Haroun shouted crossly, "you just have to go and face the music alone. I'll just have to go and face the music alone. Some friends." "No point even asking me, which you didn't," Butt the Hoopoe called after him without moving its beak. "I'm only a machine." As Haroun passed through the huge doors of P2C2E house, his heart sank. He stood in the vast, echoing entrance hall as white-coated eggheads walked rapidly past him in every direction. Haroun fancied that they all eyed him with a mixture of anger, contempt, and pity. He had to ask 3 eggheads the way to Walrus's office before he finally found it after many wanderings around P2C2E house that reminded him of following Blabbermouth around the palace. At last, however, he was standing in front of a golden door on which were written the words, "Grand Controller of Processes Too Complicated to Explain, I.M.D. Walrus, Esquire, Knock and Wait." Here I am at last, about to get the interview for which I came to Kahani in the first place, Haroun reflected nervously. It says, Jenny, Maya Rothberg is starting at 10:15. I don't know, there's a note here that says, Jenny, Maya Rothberg is starting at 10:15.
Yeah, okay, skip that.
How do I skip
Okay,
it? Did
okay,
okay?
okay, yeah. Tell them to tell them you have to do that. So go back to YouTube. finished?
No,
Oh, where are you? Oh, put it on. Are you recording all this time?
I don't know. Yeah, so I'm still recording.
Okay, we'll just say, finish it up.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know how many, there's more pages.
Yeah, I know.
So finish the story?
Yeah.
Here I am at last, I said that already. The walrus voice called, "Come in." Haroon took another breath and opened the door.
Okay.
What?
Stop recording.
Okay, so we're gonna cut off now.
You shouldn't,
What?
stop recording.